Hello and welcome, all intelligent creatures everywhere, to the Secular Nation Podcast. And for everyone else, the secret is to start banging the rocks together, guys. I am your host, Tim Brannon, and my co-host,
Michael X. Hello.
Well, it's our first new episode of the new year.
Yes, first in quite a while, apparently.
Yeah, we've kind of been held back with scheduling, and, well, I'm just lazy as hell.
Yeah, well, plus we're also freshly back from, our stint in the war on Christmas.
Oh, yeah.
Do you get in any battles with,
Not really. I pretty much kept myself cooped up in my cottage for the entire season. I had my lights up, and I had them down, like, exactly within the window that I consider acceptable. All right. I had them up Black Friday, took them down New Year's Day. Good.
Good for you. I wish some people would take their damn Keep Christ in Christmas signs down. It's friggin' January, and I still see them up. I guess
Keep Christ and Martin Luther King Day.
That's right. At least you can make an argument for that.
Yeah.
Though there were some good atheists in the civil rights movement, I should say, of course.
Have you seen the trailer for the new Noah's Ark movie?
I know very little about it.
It looks pretty good. I have to, just looking at it as a movie. First off, it's directed by Darren Aronofsky, who,
not so bad.
Definitely proven himself a competent director. I didn't much care for The Fountain, but, nobody's perfect. It is one of those things that's sort of weird. I mean, seeing the trailer, I'm thinking, okay, well, obviously this is a religious movie on one hand. The other hand, it's about the flood, and that is very clearly a metaphor for global warming. So basically, it's got something to piss off everybody.
Right, yeah. Well, I agreed with half the movie.
It's both liberal and conservative propaganda all at once.
Well, it's funny because I do remember the movie Pi somewhat very well, and the whole idea of hallucinating on drugs and religious conspiracy themes. I could see how that could fit into the Noah's Ark narrative.
Yeah.
Is that do you know anything? I mean, does the trailer give away any sense of the way they're? Is this
spoiler alert? There's a flood.
Ah, damn! Does it kill everybody?
Yeah.
But well, so I thought Evan Almighty already covered this territory, though.
Yeah. But I was actually as I am a avid poster on the IMDb forums,
Do you want to give away your avatar on the IMDb
I would prefer not to.
Okay.
But I was in the Noah boards, and I was basically, that's sort of become a hotbed for creationists. I was talking to one who was talking about how, they could get all the animals into the ark, by kinds, and okay, he had the most generalized definition of kinds. I mean, for anyone who's familiar with creationist debate, there's always that idea of kinds versus species when it comes to talking about Noah's Ark. And usually, they'll never say exactly what it is, but usually it's something, above species, but maybe below family. Except for this guy. He defined kinds by phylum. So he says, we only needed to have 25 animals on the ark. I'm like, really? Phylum? And again, for those of you who aren't biology masters, okay. Mammals, birds, reptiles, fish, amphibian, that's one phylum. Chordata. Things with backbones. So basically, so what? So they only had one backbone thing, and that's gave rise to every living thing on the planet with a backbone that walks on land. I'll assume just for a second that fish were already around, but and what did they bring? Like up to that point, the only two vertebrates other than man mentioned are a serpent and a dove. So did they bring one snake and a bird and they gave birth to all land mammals.
Well, does this guy believe that humans have backbones? So in other words, already his family.
Humans aren't animals.
Oh,
humans were created specifically by God.
Because I was about to say, then having his family already covers.
But he doesn't believe in macroevolution. Right. He only believes in evolution from birds into every other animal on Earth.
Well, I guess, yeah, as long as he's internally consistent, he's probably satisfied with himself.
Well, he doesn't really need to be internally consistent. He just needs to believe he is. But, speaking of creationism and counter-apologetics, one of the other big things is Bill Nye is going to go into this big debate with Ken Ham.
Good idea or bad idea? That seems to be the question of the week on the intertubes.
Yeah, I mean, this is one of those things that really, these sorts of debates are almost always really about publicity for the creationist. It's that sort of, hey, yeah, the creationist is, yeah, all right, I'm going to go 12 rounds with Richard Dawkins or Bill Nye or whatever. And, when most, scientists, it seems, it's really just, they don't really have to feel the need to defend their credibility, they do that on their own. Now, again, Bill Nye, he is a spokesperson for science.
Yeah. Yeah, if he talks to kids, he can talk to creationists.
But again, I do see a lot of times they will pick up, I had a debate with this Darwinist and I really stumped him when, I don't know, or maybe he didn't really stump him, but I just baffled him with my own stupidity. That was the thing I always remember going around for a while was it was video of Richard Dawkins talking to someone where they just gave this, well, do you have an example of a mutation that created new information? And just Dawkins he's basically doing the David Silverman face for a while. And they sort of get that as a victory.
Incredulous response means that I don't have anything to say, which isn't obviously not true.
Yeah, and again, I engage in, their online debates. I would love to do an actual formal debate with someone sometime, although I'm not exactly sure I'd be able to do it, but because again, that requires a more thinking on your feet.
Well, it sounds like you have to be really prepared for the other person to be so dishonest that it will completely, again, give you the WTF face. That
exactly. Because even in my own times I've debated people online, a lot of times, they give me arguments that just sort of just betray the fact that, okay, this person is not at all acquainted with the idea of making rational arguments or making rational sense. So I can't really... I can't see myself getting around that.
Yeah, if your opponent doesn't value intellectual honesty, then what's the point of a debate in the first place?
Really, I mean, it is generally, I think I hear this over and over again, that it's not so much, you're not trying to, change the person's opinion, you're trying to get those ideas out there, to have these person's arguments out there, and then having the refutations of those arguments.
Well, the classic right-winger or creationist as postmodernist, where all they're really doing is sowing doubt, putting you in a mindset rather than actually the old school debate concept that you can convince one another.
Well, that's why they always say, atheism is a religion, or, you can't prove that God doesn't exist.
Yeah, rhetoric is the highest form of argument rather than, the inverse, right? I had very mixed feelings about that because I've seen Bill Nye take down climate science deniers on TV pretty well, and in his kind of homespun way, it's like the opposite of the bit of the hitch slap, that he's so gentle about it that you almost don't realize that you're being eviscerated, and I would like to see that happen. But I think that he's probably not prepared for that level of dishonesty.
Well, yeah. I mean, that may or may not be the case. I think there's also the sort of financial aspect of, he's doing this debate, and the money is, going mostly to Ham's organization. At least that's my understanding of the situation.
Yeah, it's a lot of money from what I understand. And I heard that the tickets, I guess, were all sold to church groups, that they shut down the website as people in the public were trying to get tickets. And Aaron Ra, I think, was saying that he couldn't get a ticket, though he was planning on going.
Yeah.
But also, the one good thing I did see recently is that they are going to live stream it. So it's not going to be one of those hermetically sealed debates where they can then release the 3-second version showing Ken Ham standing victorious.
Yeah.
Against the withered Bill Nye.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, maybe they just they have that. They just digitally add Bill Nye getting hit by a meteor.
Right, you didn't see
and
that coming,
claims
Mr.
victory.
You said, predict this, Dr. Nye.
Coming up next, me and Mike sit down with author Laurie A. Egan about her new novel, Outcast Oracle. Laurie, great to have you on the show.
Yes. Thank you, Tim.
So why don't you tell our viewers sort of what the story is about? Because actually it's an interesting thing in our line of work in the podcast. We get a lot of books that we talk to the authors about, but they're almost always nonfiction books. And, again, their authors are great, though they kind of get tedious because a lot of it is the same stuff over and over again. So it's kind of great that we actually get to talk about a fiction book.
Well, yeah, I can understand. The Humanist Press, which is the publishing arm of the American Humanist Association, picked this book up and just was a really natural fit. And actually, I didn't write it for them or for this purpose, but it really worked out extremely well. The book is a little different. It's sort of got a Mark Twain kind of feel to it, in the sense that it's a somewhat of a satiric piece at times. Other times, it's got some other aspects like a little romance, a little drama, a little danger, and some thoughts that are in throughout the narrator's head as you read through. The book is a book that both adults and I would say middle to late teens would enjoy. It's been sort of slotted in the teen market, but I think the adult readers have been really enjoying it too. So I'd say anybody really would be a good target for this book. It's set in 1959, and it's on the shores of New York's Lake Ontario, which was actually the reason I started the book was the setting. And then very shortly after I sat down trying to think of what to write about, the narrator's voice came into my head. Her name is Charlie, or Charlene Beth Whitestone. And it was really like channeling. I think that's the closest way I could describe the process. And I got her voice, her personality, and she just sort of told me what to put in here. She is 14 when the book is opening and 15 by the time the book is finished. And at the beginning, we find out that she's been deserted by her parents. And she's been left in the custody of her grandfather, C.B., who is quite a charming con man. He's an artist, a con artist, a moonshiner, and most importantly, a religious fraud. And he's quite a character, almost has a little Dickensian quality to him. He has various enterprises that he really gets poor Charlie involved with, and I'm going to read a little piece later on, which is early in the book, to describe one of her activities. His most profitable one is running the Glory Alleluia Chapel, though he's never been to seminary, and in fact, he's a total fake, and does not believe in God, nor does Charlie. So that's sort of the setting for the book. We sort of encounter her and the grandfather in the beginning, and then at one point the grandfather dies, and then Charlie is left on her own. And she's a very resourceful girl, but she's certainly got some problems to deal with. So that's sort of where the story begins.
Charlie's a very interesting character, and she's very resourceful, and what I think would be interesting to a lot of humanists. Not only is she becoming an itinerant preacher, she also is faced with some moral dilemmas about trying to exist in this world as a young lady, non-believer, / being raised by somebody who is kind of a lovable fraud.
Yes. She's got a lot of issues, and, she hasn't really completely worked out why her parents left, and they were rather difficult to begin with. So she's dealing with a lot of things. She's an only child. She lives in a rural area. She's better educated in many ways than her peer group. And she's very much sort of a typical creative loner type. And so, she's already got that social issue to deal with, and she feels somewhat ostracized by other kids in her class, and she's not really sure why. And so it is a really difficult situation for her, and I think a lot of young adults and also adults would identify with her plight, because she is very much on her own, even though she has her grandfather to start with. So I think she's an interesting character, and the mood of that character is really what started me on writing the book.
Now, I haven't gotten a chance to read too far into it. As a matter of fact, I think I left it at work and they may have thrown it away. But anyway, I was actually very interested in knowing how you portray the grandfather character, who, again, you described as, a liar and a con man. I mean, how did you go about, creating that character and actually, making him non-despicable?
That wasn't so hard, because he had a very strong voice come into my head too, and he likes to sort of listen to himself speak. That's why I think he's a natural sermonizer, so to speak. And he's really a mixed kind of character, much in the way some of Mark Twain's characters are. I think he's really cares about Charlie a lot, and that's very clear from the beginning, which also really helps the reader sympathize with him. A man that can be so kind towards his granddaughter, for example. That's really a good thing. And I think we get a good spin about him from the very beginning. And the fact that Charlie, who seems like a really decent sort, also really cares about him, I think helps the reader accept his ways, even though some of them are illegal and some of them are manipulative. He also does some kind things here and there. So he's a sort of a tricky character. He's got a little bit of everything with him.
Yeah, so this book is your third book, or how many books have you written?
Well, it depends on how you're counting.
Yeah.
I had a collection of short stories published, Fog and Other Stories. That has been picked up by Humanist Press this fall because my original publisher went out of business. And those stories have mostly been published in literary journals. And then I have a novel that's a little different type of thing. It's a psychological suspense story set in Venice, and that's called Jenny Kidd, and that was published by Vagabondage Press a year or two ago. And then I have 3 books of poetry that have been published. So I have that's sort of how I got my start, even though I'd been writing novels all along. Poetry was the first thing I did. So I have Snow Shadows and Stranger and Beneath the Lion's Paw, which are full-length collections, and a little chapbook called The Sea and Beyond. All 3 were published by Foothills in New York State. So this book is a little different. Each one of them, everything I've done has been a little different, to tell you the truth, and I can't exactly explain why that's so, but it seems to be.
I should add, too, that I was amused that the book Jenny Kidd was shortlisted for a Saboteur Award in the UK, which I always never realized that saboteurs were that literate.
Well, I don't really know how that happened, and I really don't know much about it. It's from the UK. That's where I guess this award is given. But I sort of like the idea of being a saboteur somehow. It appeals to me.
Outcast Oracle, is this your first one that sort of deals with, issues of faith and religion?
Yes, a couple of my short stories that are in Fog and Other Stories, I would say there are a few in there that also do. Payback is one, which is, in some ways, you can sort of see a little bit of a thread from the heroine in that story, who's a little younger, but how she deals with a guy that is probably a fraud, but he calls himself a minister, and she has a little run-in with him. And so I think that sort of began to sort of set me on that tone and that motion towards doing something like this. But no, I haven't done anything else dealing with the subject, and I'm very pleased to actually tackle it because it's something very close to my heart. So I'm really happy that Humanist Press picked it up.
It is interesting as writers of fiction. When I am a wannabe author, not really, I haven't written anything in so long, but a lot of times my previous stories, I usually do things within an atheistic universe. Although, just in the mere act of writing something in fiction, it is, by necessity, atheistic universe, because that God is the writer for the most part.
Well, one of the things that I could say about my work in general is because I have always been a non-believer ever since I was very small, I write from that perspective, and not that I always bring it up, but sometimes I will make a comment ascribing, let's say, somebody who has a religious fervor as not necessarily a smart character, or it may, maybe something very subtle like that. But I write from that perspective, but I wouldn't say that it would necessarily be front and center until I wrote The Outcast Oracle. So I think this whole religious point of view is definitely ingrained in me and has been from the very beginning when I first started writing. So I think it's there. It's just maybe not shouted out on every page, that kind of thing.
Yeah, the Charlie character, I have to say, is very well painted, and I can see why you had a sense that you were channeling her, because she does really have her own voice, her own perspective. I was very I enjoy the character quite a bit. You brought up your history, your background, and this is a common question we ask guests: is what is your religious history? So you say you lost your faith, or you had no, or you've been an atheist since you were very young.
Never had any.
Yeah.
Well, my parents were very sort of different people. My mother, if asked, would say she was agnostic, or to somebody who didn't know her well, she'd try the Unitarian trick. Though I never saw her put one foot in a church of any kind, except for funerals and weddings. And my father was raised in a very large Catholic family, and the church was rather abusive to his single mother, and he really formed a very much of a dislike for the Catholic Church. So, he just didn't want to do anything. And so my parents, I think, when they got together, just made a tacit agreement that I could do what I wanted to do when I wanted to do it, and they didn't even bother baptizing me. So I really grew up without hearing anything much about religion in the family. Neither parent really ever said anything. I really wasn't sure completely of what their viewpoints were, except that they never went to church. They really didn't go in for the whole religious thing, and I don't think either one of them really believes in God, to tell you the truth, but they, still of that generation that sort of was nervous about saying so. But as a result, I read Bertrand Russell, Why I'm Not a Christian, when I was about 12 years old, and thought, aha, finally, somebody agrees with me. And I remember, a lot of my friends or schoolmates were very religious. A lot of them were very Catholic, and I went to a few Sunday schools just to check them out and see what was going on. And I had uniformly horrible things happen. Like the priest would find out I hadn't been baptized, and he would go on and on about how I was going to burn in hell. And oh my goodness, it was just ridiculous. So I was pretty well cemented, all by my own thinking. By the time I was able to even consider the religious issue. And I've held exactly the same viewpoint all my life. So I'd say it's been well over, it's close to about 58 years or so at least that I've had it. So I've never really, no matter what kind of difficult times in my life, I've never veered from this position.
It sounds like you've almost had the ideal upbringing that atheists kind of strive for, which is you were raised without even the thought of it. It was really the outside world that kind of brought it into you.
That's exactly right. An aunt once when I was 5 told me, she'd had a few drinks and she pulled me into my bedroom and told me I was going to burn in hell, blah, blah, blah. And, I was rather rude to her, which was not like me at that point. But I won't repeat what I said, but it was just definitely, no, I will not. And I don't agree with you. And I remember having trouble with my babysitters, who wanted me to say prayers before I went to bed, and I would refuse. And my mother would support me in that when the babysitter complained. So, it was intrusive if I experienced religion at all and not welcome. But my parents were very laissez-faire about the whole thing.
Yeah, it's a good thing they were bad advertisements for their own religion.
Mm-hmm.
Again, Tim mentioned earlier that we're used to talking with people who've just come out with a kind of polemic. We're not used to people discussing fiction unless, of course, we're talking about the Bible. And the biggest names in our atheist/humanist whatever movement tend to be philosophers or scientists or activists. What do you think the possible role of creative people, artistic people in the movement might be?
Well, I think that's a very important question, and I was thinking about it this afternoon. First of all, I think scientists and philosophers have a certain advantage in discussing their non-religious views, because if they write a book or an article, or if it's in a scholarly interview, they can say things that they can say, well, I have a theory, or I have a hypothesis, or my research shows that this is so, or I can create a logical construction that shows me that my beliefs are correct. And because they are usually people that are already in sort of rarefied careers, I think the general population is a little less likely to be able to do much damage to them, because they are, fairly well established in their field, and they're usually talking above the level of the average person. Now, when you have a creative writer or a filmmaker or somebody, maybe a TV producer, I think it's a little different situation. It's much more personal. In other words, particularly for a writer, a book like The Outcast Oracle is my own personal experience, expression, belief, structure, whatever set out there. And I think more people are willing to take pot shots at an author because they feel that they can be on the same playing field. And as a result, I think it's a little more difficult to do that. And I think films are a perfect example. I mean, so much of American culture is so far behind where the advances in civil rights and gay rights, et cetera, are. It's sort of ridiculous. But I think that's because there's a vulnerability to the marketplace that scientists and philosophers don't have as much. That said, we also have the opportunity, because we're more, that more people read our work. I think we have more of an opportunity to make points of view. And one of the reasons the Outcast Oracle, I hope, will succeed is just because it's been written in a way that I think people can take it in and not be offended, even people that do have strong sets of religious values. They could take it in as sort of fun and interesting without taking so much offense at it. Although that said, one right-wing conservative journal got a hold of a copy somehow and went to town on me. But mostly, I think, yeah, they did. But mostly, what they went in town is because it was Humanist Press and the AHA, and they spent most of the time, yelling and screaming at them instead of me. So I think if I hadn't been affiliated, I don't know that they would have even bothered with the book. So I think there is a lot of targeting going on, and it does make it a little harder for a writer out there who wants to communicate things, but we need people to buy the books, etc. And if there's a lot of negative or, book banning, book panning by a certain number of conservative types, it does, create a problem. So I think it is difficult. But I think if we can overcome this, it will really be a big advantage if done in the right way.
Yeah, I think there's definitely a much more humanizing element when we talk about, fictional works, novels and cinematic movies as opposed to, nonfiction and documentaries that, we can actually sort of see the experience of a person of non-belief as opposed to just, a dry pontification of, well, why does this religious argument fail, or here's the scientific this or that. And I think that's something that should be, more prevalent.
Well, I agree with you. In fact, I watch a lot of foreign films and a lot of BBC films, and it's very interesting how many just naturally assume a secular point of view and raise an eyebrow when a religious person enters the plot. And it's so different than it is now in this country. And I'm always struck by this. And so I think it is our job here in America to try and be a little more persuasive in a fair way, in a way that still engages people of all different kinds of beliefs, if we can.
Yeah, I see your point. You're in good company in that respect. You mentioned Mark Twain, Kurt Vonnegut, the Golden Compass series. A lot of we need more of that in a way. That's well put.
There are a lot of writers that are atheists, agnostics, etc. A huge number, and yet they don't, because they don't necessarily deal with a religious issue up front. They're not tagged as this is what this book is about. And I think it's a little bit cowardly sometimes. I wish they would be a little more forthcoming about their viewpoints, because there's so many, writers out there that are non-believers, that are documented in interviews and pieces, articles written about them. And, or in their own autobiographies. It's a very impressive list, which of course makes sense. So,
do you think there's a reluctance, like you said, to get into the fray, that if let's take just for a moment, the right-wing Christian perspective that these humanist authors are trying to deconvert everyone by stealth, that if an author wanted to do this well, they wouldn't be out in public. They would just kind of keep putting those books out and hope that nobody, that these books would kind of poison the belief.
I think they just try to slide in along the side a little bit instead of being more direct. Certainly there are books that deal with atheism and religion more directly, but I think a lot of those are from outside of the United States, and I would like to see this done. I think it is a bit cowardly. I mean, if you think about the old thing that we've been reading about, that of all the various groups to be elected, who could be elected president, atheists were at the bottom of the list. Well, that tells me that the marketplace has that. That's part of the marketplace, and so as a result, an author is going to be maybe a little worried about that if their goal is to sell books. Mine doesn't happen to be to sell books. It's to communicate and to work on this myself and for my own satisfaction, and hopefully, give pleasure or interest to other people. But I think that a lot of authors do write with the idea of the bottom line, and then you're going to be into some trouble if you get too strident about your religious beliefs or non-beliefs.
No, actually, I think that's kind of fair to say in either case, because again, I'm sure there are plenty of Christian authors who, when they write, they don't want to make the Christianity part of the whole thing, or else they'll get sort of shoved back into that corner of the bookstore called religious fiction.
Well, I think there's a very, very large and powerful Christian culture that's evolved in this country as the country has sort of split itself into red and blue states. I get a lot of email postings of short story contests and journals that are looking for certain kinds of stories. And there is an enormous increase in Christian-oriented or themed journals and requests for fiction. So I've noticed it in the last 10 years even. So that tells me something is happening, and so a lot of people are very, very carefully writing for the Christian market because it's a big market, and it's well defined. They know how to get to them, and I wish the same were true of the atheist or the humanist market. It isn't, unfortunately. Maybe at some point it will as the the beliefs of the country change, and they certainly are changing. But I think right now the Christians are sort of beating us at every turn in terms of marketing their viewpoint in terms of the media, the culture, books, and films, etc., music. And I think it's becoming a sort of a real dividing line.
So if that's the case, we should probably mention right this very second that your books are available on Kindle through Amazon, through the Humanist Press website, right? So they can start buying.
Yeah, and particularly from the Humanist Press website, because that helps them out even more and gives them a sense of how many, and it helps people learn about them. They have not done very much fiction. This book is one of the first. And as you would expect, however, they are, they have some wonderful books in the nonfiction arena. So this is sort of a beginning for them. This is a relatively new endeavor for Humanist Press to get into the fiction market. And I believe they also have one or maybe a couple of younger, like picture books or for younger children too.
Yeah, but I imagine this sort of, I wouldn't call it an encroachment, but this trend in Christian fiction is probably especially strong in the YA genre, which is what your book is in, correct?
Yeah, well, technically it is. It's really a young adult through adult, I would say. Mm-hmm. Yes, there are a lot of YA books out there that are in the Christian market, but there are tons and tons in romance, even sci-fi. Romance particularly is a big area for the Christian market, and or just commercial fiction. Not very much literary fiction, I note.
So what's next? Do you have something in the pipeline?
Well, I have one manuscript called Wave in D minor that I have gotten really close to getting representation for, but I think I'm going to do a little more work on it. I thought was completed. It's sort of a literary suspense novel about a young composer. And then I'm working on another project that is an expansion of a short story, Django Jacks, which is the lead piece in my collection, Fog and Other Stories. I decided he was another character that just came into my head, and I don't know quite from where, but he did. And so I've written, I've got about 39, almost 40,000 words now. I had it as a novella, and then I decided to do a part 2. So I'm trying to get it into novel range right at the moment. So that's ongoing right now. So I have those 2 projects that are floating around.
Do you think those will also fit in with the Humanist Press framework, or are you just going to take it where they take it? Yeah.
Yeah, probably not. There are some good points in the work that I'm doing right now on Django Jacks that might might be of interest to them. I'm not sure. Their philosophy at Humanist Press is, I think, still evolving quite a bit about fiction, because they can see a nonfiction book and tell whether it's appropriate for them or not. It's a little harder for them for fiction because they haven't seen as much of it. So we'll see. I don't know how I'm going to end it. If I end it one way, it may be better for them, and if I end it another way, it may not.
Well, of course, and you're channeling his voice, right? So
Yeah. Well, I've got a couple of strange ones. I had a little young sociopath hit me one morning, and boy, was he scary. I don't know where he came from. Luckily, it was only about a 5 or 6 page story. I was glad to see the other end of him, but it was a really interesting piece, as it turned out. So not every book starts with that kind of voice that comes into my head, but quite a few of them do. And I don't know, I can't explain where this is happening from, because these aren't characters. Django Jack, for example, is not like me in any way that I can think of, except that he doesn't believe in God.
Well, it was great talking to you, Laurie Egan. Now, just give us a plug for your book again.
Okay, well, I'm the author of The Outcast Oracle, which was just published this fall by Humanist Press. And in fact, it was included in Crocus Review's 2013 Best Books, which was very exciting. So I think it's a fine little fellow, and he's going forward into the world. Thank you both, Michael and Tim. I really appreciate the opportunity to answer some questions and talk about what I've been doing. That's great.
Yeah, it's a great book, and as one of the characters, CB would say, it's a Jim Dandy. So thanks.
This is the Secular Nation Podcast, signing out.